Good day, everybody. Good day. As you're coming in, welcome to the webinar. We have part 4 of this series with Dr. Matthews. So I would say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day to whenever you view it. I really have enjoyed these sessions with Dr. Matthews, and he's just been such a powerful teacher. I mean, I guess it is his profession. He's really good at it. But yeah, we'd like to know where you guys are from. We've literally gotten views from this all over the world. Dr. Matthews, I'm kind of sad that this is coming to an end. This is a Standing Watch webinar series. My name is Ashley Floyd. I work with Naval X, and we've partnered, well, honestly, Don Sapro, they've done all the work. They've brought this amazing community of viewers in here. They put together an amazing and phenomenal webinar series, bringing in great speakers and amazing topics. And so we've just partnered with them to give them the platform to bring the information to you guys, for you guys to get credits, certificates for credits that go towards certifications for you all, but not just that, but just to bring you amazing content. We've been having Dr. Matthews the last 3 weeks, so this is the 4th week, and he just brings powerful messages, amazing jokes and slides and content that you're just not gonna, it's hard to get to these kind of things. Wasn't able to get up the last video up on YouTube yet, but once we're done, we're going to make a playlist for Dr. Matthews. It's going to be on the Naval X YouTube page, www.com/ wait, I don't even know what I just said. youtube.com/ Naval X. But these are going to be able to be viewed from many platforms. And let me see, I lost my PowerPoint. Let's start over. I don't want to end the show. I want to go back. I always keep forgetting to put the slides on auto repeat, but yeah, welcome you guys. Good day. Let us know where you guys are calling from. We're going to get started with the webinar in a couple of minutes. If technology fails, the manual way is still a good way to go. Just clicking back through these slides. But welcome, guys. Good afternoon, morning, evening, and whenever you guys are viewing this, good day. I wanted to bring you part 4 of Dr. Mike Matthews' webinar under the Standing Watch webinar series with Don Sapro. We're excited you guys can join us. Please share these videos with your colleagues, and they're not only good for getting your continuing education certification requirements fulfilled, but this is great content. Dr. Matthews has talked about some amazing things. I think one of my favorite things, I think this might have been in the first or the second, and I've seen him because we actually had him on a webinar with Naval X. He actually has this picture about getting through adversity, or it's like this brick wall. It's like you can stand there, you go over it, under it, around it, or through it. But some way you got to get past. And I think that was one of my favorite things that he shared. One of the favorite pictures that he shared. And then definitely the leadership one, where nobody sees what you do to get to the top, but there's many things that go into people's processes. And even it was a good question that came up from a former, from one of the attendees, and said, well, what if that isn't your story? What if it was kind of easier to get to the top? That's okay. Some people are going to go through more things to get to the top than others, but I can tell you, he said something that was so profound. The first place person kind of gets there sometimes and knows they're going to get first place because they're just literally the best in the world. But the most powerful things is you see the reaction for the second and third place, because sometimes they didn't even think they were going to get there, but they pushed through and they overcame whatever they did to just come out on top. So welcome you guys to today's webinar. We have Dr. Mike Matthews for the 4th part of his session. I'm going to introduce, so Naval X is the Navy Super Connectors. So we just created this platform on Zoom for Government for Don Sapro to give you guys good information. So I'm going to introduce Jessica. She works for Don Sapro, and she's going to take away the introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks so much for being here. I see we've got folks once again from all over the world: South Korea, Diego Garcia, Kuwait, Norfolk, Great Lakes. Welcome. Thanks again for joining us and tuning in. For those of you who are on for the first time, and I realize we've got a lot of repeat customers, which we're really grateful for. To give you some background, we started this Standing Watch webinar series when we recognized the unique stressors that many of our first responders were facing during COVID-19. And our goal is to really provide our first responder workforce with the resources they need for maintaining the resilience and self-care so that you can continue to provide optimal care to the folks in the field who need it. And we've been really excited to see the growing interest beyond our first responder community. I know we've had a lot of leaders across multiple different types of occupations tune in. And so thanks so much for joining us. It's really been an honor to spend the last 4 sessions. This is the 4th of a 4-part series with Dr. Matthews. He is one of the leading military psychologists probably in the world. A professor at the U.S. Military Academy. He has written extensively on performance, character, different aspects of military psychology, and focused a lot on resilience in his work and his work with others. And really looking forward to some of the work that is coming out in October. I know he's been working on a character book with General Caslen, The Character Edge. And so General Caslen, the former superintendent of West Point and now the University of South Carolina president, has agreed to do an October Standing Watch session with Dr. Matthews, and we are super psyched to talk about character and leadership. And so the last thing I want to mention about Dr. Matthews before we start this session, for anyone who hasn't been on previously, he is also a former service member and former law enforcement responder. And I think that makes a difference in terms of how he thinks about these issues and the types of linkages he can make in comparison with folks who are maybe just on the research side of things. We are going to take live questions today, and I just want to remind everybody to include any questions you have in the question and answer box, so not the chat box, but the question and answer box, and then we'll select folks to respond. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mike Matthews. Mike, it looks like you might be muted. There you go.
I'm so good with technology. Just realized it helps to unmute this thing. Hey, thank you everybody for tuning in. I really want to say is how rewarding I found it the last 3 weeks to be with you and to share my ideas and have these discussions with you. It's just a real opportunity and something I'm just grateful to Jess and the whole Naval X team for setting that up. So thanks you all for the team for setting it up and for you all enduring my comments. Just a comment about General Caslen, President Caslen's session next month. We're still kind of figuring out exactly what that'll look like. I'll probably be on there, but you've probably had enough of Matthew, so I'll kind of keep a little lower profile here so you can hear more of General Caslen's profound insights. He's really good. I saw someone sign on from Joint Base Lewis McChord just a while ago. Didn't catch the name, but General Caslen and I did a session similar to this for Colonel Chung out at JBLM just last Monday. And at some point, I think you can find that. If you're interested in seeing that, I think that may already be up on YouTube. If not, it will be pretty soon. So if you're at JBLM, you can contact Colonel Chung. He's a brigade commander there, the 2-2 Combat Brigade Team. And his Lieutenant Lutz, or one of his people, can give you that link. So let me just make a comment before we move on from this. Hey, Timothy. Cool, good to see you. The title of today's presentation or discussion, obviously this comes from the classic movie, The Wizard of Oz, but my idea of using this, first of all, it wasn't my idea. There's a professor of law at Suffolk University in the Boston area. His name's Lyle Baker. And we've become friends over the years, and he's become really interested in positive psychology and character and many of the same things we've discussed the last 3 sessions. And so Lyle and I were talking, and he said, you know, they bring on about 300 new law students every year at his university, and he's been there 42 years. So I'm not very good at math, so I pulled my calculator out, and that's 12,000. He said 12,600 new law students come through in that time frame, more or less, well over 10,000. And so the one thing is, you know, through the years he's learned is that doing well, achieving and surviving and adapting to and even flourishing in law school, and even more so later on as an attorney, is almost nothing to do with your LSAT scores, you know. So you get selected into law school largely on your aptitude test. But he said what really differentiates what he's found through the years, what's really made the difference between the law student who's successful as a student and then later in their law careers, and those who are not, are those who are able to do what we've been talking about, to learn about their own character strengths and to leverage them to overcome adversities and so forth. And so he actually came up with this idea of, you know, the scarecrow, the Tin Man, the lion, the cowardly lion, capture a lot of these things, that these character strengths that are important to us. So you think back to the movie, you know, it's basically about a quest. It's a quest to find something that's missing in your life. And for the scarecrow, it was right. It was his brains, right? He didn't feel like he had strengths of the head, curiosity, love of learning, maybe perspective. You think about the Tin Man. There he was, you know, rusted up out in the woods, joins the crew. But what was he missing? He didn't have strengths of the heart. He didn't have capacity to love or kindness. He knew, just as the scarecrow knew about his brains, that if that was lacking in his life, you know, there was going to be something missing. He couldn't be a complete Tin Man, nor could the scarecrow be a complete scarecrow. And of course, everyone's favorite, perhaps, the cowardly lion, who, you know, lacks, you know, various attributes of courage. And they go about this quest. And, you know, and really, for that matter, think about Dorothy. You know, what's her quest? Well, what she's missing, you know, she seems to be pretty brave, and she seems to have a good heart, you know, and she's pretty smart, but she's missing her family connections, the social strengths, you know, which could kind of be also maybe considered, you know, spread across these others. But all 4 of them go on this quest, and they're willing to overcome all sorts of dangers, from wicked witches and flying monkeys to whatever, you know, whatever the Land of Oz throws at them. They even have to outwit the wizard at the end to achieve their quest. So I titled this session today, this is really a summary session, The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, to capture that idea that all of us, you know, want to have complete, full lives that lead to meaning. And that we learn to harness these strengths and to use them in the right ways at the right time in the right places, that helps us achieve that goal. So the meat of today's discussion is going to be three case studies. One's going to have to do with strengths of the head. One case study is going to be strengths of the heart. And then one case study is strengths of the gut. And so let's move on. We're going to have a couple of preliminary ideas, and we'll get into those 3 case studies. And as we do so, after that, we'll have lots of time for discussion. So here's an old quote. Consider this 105 years old. I think if Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was one of the heroes at Gettysburg, if he was quoted today, he'd probably be more inclusive and wouldn't just say bad men. But consider the quote for the thought behind it. War is for the participants a test of character. It makes bad men worse and good men better. Of course, women, and as well. But think about other adversities that we are all dealing with. I mean, we started this whole, the rationale behind this series is that we're all under more pressure and more stress maybe than before because of the pandemic, and ever more so social justice issues. And for right now, and for the next weeks and months to follow, the people down in Louisiana coast around St. Charles, and maybe even a bit into Texas. Now, on top of all of that, now they're dealing with, the aftermath of this hurricane. And unfortunately, while particular challenges come and go, the reality of life is that we're going to continue to face them as long as we're fortunate enough to be, walking the planet on our two legs, instead breathing the air. So what we've talked about is really super important in terms of developing yourselves to be resilient, your children to be resilient, and if you're a leader, developing those you lead, and then your team to be so as well. So I thought you'd just like that quote. It's one of my favorites, stemming really back from the Civil War. Next, please. So I've been either in the military or working for the Army for 4 decades. And I love acronyms as much as anybody. I'm an acronym guy, and one of my favorite ones, I'm not sure the Navy community has heard this one. I'm not sure the contemporary Army community is so in tune with this. But for a while, 20 years ago, I heard the word VUCA a lot, VUCA. And it stands, you can read, for a situation that's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And of course, in the military context, you jump of an example of that as being, a combat situation. But there are others, right? So the pandemic is VUCA, is it not? It's volatile because it's changing. There's times when, for example, New York was really being hit at a high rate. Now it's sort of subsided. But then the southern tier of states from Florida to California got hit hard. Now it's rising in the Midwest. It sort of undulates across the country, and it's hard to predict, what's going to come next, which leads to that uncertainty as well. So when things are uncertain, that increases the stress level a bunch. It's a complex question. It'd be really nice if simply wearing a mask could take care of it, or there was a 5-week solution that would solve it. But to solve the pandemic problem, the COVID problem, is going to require integrated efforts across a lot of levels, and it's ambiguous. What I've learned as a military psychologist is that VUCA situations in some people do in fact amplify negative reactions. So there's anywhere from 5 to 15% of the population of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who, when faced with the adversity of combat and the horror in some cases of combat, the trauma of combat, the VUCA situation brings out their lesser good selves, their worst selves. It may manifest itself in a clinical thing like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. Or it could also manifest itself in bad conduct, bad character, treating people badly, drinking excessively, substance abuse of other sorts. But the interesting thing about this, I think this is a message I really want you to walk away with, that this is maybe the most important thing, tied for most important, is that these VUCA situations also may provide the seedbed for positive adaptation, which is a fancy way of saying growth. A lot of people do get better. More people get better following VUCA than get worse. So going back to Colonel Chamberlain's statement, there are a lot of negative consequences to combat, and by extension to pandemics and all the other stressors that we're dealing with. But many, many people, more commonly, the most common trajectory is that of over the long run, doing better and actually growing. So what is it that, what are the factors which really influence, how strongly we change? And the 3 things that you see below, the 3 factors which really, are sort of stress multipliers. The first one is intensity. How intense is the situation? The second is how long it's going to last. Does it have an end date? And the third is perceived lack of control. And these are interesting to think about. So, if you're deployed in a combat situation, then, you know, it can be the most intense thing in the world 1% of the time, right? So they say police work is 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. I think it's very similar to in that way in the military and combat. The intensity can vary a lot. So, so think about the pandemic. You can make your own judgments on how intense, your reaction to the pandemic is. I'll tell you what, for sure, living here in the suburbs of New York City in April, when people were dying at the rate they were dying, we had 6 deaths just here in my immediate neighborhood within a 3-minute walk of my house. You felt like you were getting shot at. It felt quite real. Pretty intense. Duration, we don't know. And sometimes that's worse. If you knew the darn pandemic was going to go for 17 months, you could maybe just grit your teeth and plan on it and get through it. That would make it easier. But we don't know. It's going to be long, and we don't know how long. And then whether you perceive you have any control over it is really important. Now, it's interesting to think about another pandemic. We have a pandemic in the United States almost every year. It's called the common cold, the variations of the common cold. But it doesn't cause any problem, right? Because the intensity is low. The duration of both having the cold and the cold season isn't forever. And maybe you don't have a lot of control over catching cold, but washing your hands, following basic rules of cleanliness and hygiene can certainly reduce the possibility of it. You can analyze almost any situation that's VUCA. Think about the hurricane. The hurricane this week is off the scale intensity. The immediate effects didn't last very long, although they're going to deal with the after effects for a long time. No control. There's no control over a hurricane, really. All you can do is get out of town if it's coming your way. So when you think about the VUCA situations you're dealing with, it's probably useful to analyze them in terms of intensity, duration, and lack of control. One thing that will really help our current pandemic is when we get a vaccination, a good vaccine developed, because then you will develop an increased sense of control. Because if it's a 90% or 85% effective vaccine, that's going to boost that and will help mitigate against intensity and duration. So just general thoughts about the psychological basis of stress, and let's go to the next slide. So there's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania named Martin Seligman, and he's developed he calls the PERMA, it's an acronym, the PERMA model of resilience and personal growth. And in the PERMA model, you can see these 5, what the acronym stands for. So these are like the elements of the good life. And the good life, meaning one free of worry and anxiety and depression, and the life in which you can achieve things and help others and make a mark in the world that's positive, involve positive emotion. So positive emotion, that can be something like, imagine a scale of -10 to +10, and -10 is abject depression. You don't want to get out of bed. You just can't operate. +10 is your 10th birthday party. I mean, it's just, and most of us are in between there most of the time. The good life is characterized not by being a 7 or an 8 or a 9 on positive emotion day in and day out. Few of us could sustain the energy required to be at that level of positivity. But you want to be to the right of the 0 point, So, if life is going well, if you can be a 2 or a 3 kind of day in and day out of this -10 to +10 scale, that's a good thing. You can fluctuate upwards now and then when good things happen. By engagement, Dr. Seligman means that we are involved in things in our lives that are so intrinsically interesting to us that we can deep dive into them and start losing track of time, So when things are going really well for me in terms of my physical fitness, and I was much better at this when I was younger, but I really like to run. And if I was running a really, really good long run, sometimes you have this out of body experience, and maybe you guys, if you're runners or other endurance sports, experience this, and you have this sense that that you're just sort of floating, and it's really this disengagement from life, and that's a good thing. You can find this in your work. You can find this in your social relationships. There are a lot of ways to find it. R stands for relationships. We've emphasized this a lot in the last 3 sessions. Beginning with your family, your immediate family, your extended family, your work family. Your family that consists of people in your team and your club. You know, if those are positive and bring you rewards, that's very, very important part of the good life. And then there's meaning. We've mentioned this a lot too. The ultimate goal is to have meaning in life. A meaningful life is a great mitigator against depression and PTSD and stress. You know, that doesn't mean that if you're living the meaningful life that you don't experience adversity, but you're able to frame it in ways that enhance that meaning of life. And the fifth thing is accomplishment. So if you do all those things and you accomplish good things in life, think how that feeds back. So don't you feel good when you accomplish something? So that feeds back to positive emotion. And positive emotion helps you stay engaged. And if you're feeling positive about yourself, that helps facilitate your relationships. All of those continue to build meaning, and then you accomplish something else. You get this virtuous cycle of positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment that work together and spiral up rather than spiraling down. You've all heard the phrase, you spiraling down in life. Well, I can tell you, it's possible to spiral up in life too. And one way to do that are through these tools we note here at the bottom of the slide, through positive character, social and family relationships, and even the performance triad, which for those of you who weren't there for the last week's presentation, that comes out of the Army lab, Army Surgeon General's office, and talks about the details of sleep, nutrition, and exercise, the performance triad. Next, please. Oh, I've got a comment I see from John about the survey that I think I read, kind of flashed just past me, but that compensation is not the most important thing for most people. I've actually done research on that, and sorry to frago and to go down this rabbit hole, but that's an important point. From the work perspective, I mean, everybody needs enough money. Money is a good thing, compensation is important, but empirical studies of it, especially for trained, skilled workers and white collar workers, is that other things about the job are far more important to giving you satisfaction towards your job than how much you're compensated. So a sense of important and meaningful work is probably the most important thing. Sorry for that side comment. Okay, the psychological foundation, the resilience and personal growth. These are just examples. The point is that PERMA is trainable. There's some things that University of Pennsylvania has developed called the Penn Resilience Program, applied mostly to 7th and 8th graders. I mean, they've done this big time with hundreds and hundreds of kids and found that this, 10 lesson training program makes kids, those PERMA things get better and they stay better for periods of time. This, in fact, was the basis for the Army's Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program. It incorporates many of the same principles, but tailored and couched for soldiers instead of 7th and 8th graders. Navy has been working on something, I don't know if they still call it this or not, the Sailor Toughness Program. It has a lot of the same components into it. We talked last week about hardiness training. Military training, basic training, if done right, can build PERMA. There was a comment towards the end of the presentation last week that by an NCO, I think, was sort of making the point that from his perspective that it was difficult to execute training in the right way to build these characteristics like grit and tenacity and courage because of concerns about, alienating young soldiers or whatever it might be. And that comment's exactly right. So you can build grit through military training, but it's got to be done the right way. And in another session someday, we could maybe spend the whole hour just talking about that. But there are other things that are not on this slide through which PERMA is trained and built. And these are the most important ones, right? So think about, where does your PERMA come from? Well, it came from your family when you were a child. It came from your parents or those who raised you. It came from the teams you were a member of in school. It came from scouting, perhaps. It came from a favorite aunt or uncle that you spent time with. it can come from your church or your religious organization. All of these things, together drive the development of positive character, which in turn drives positive adaptation, resistance to stress, and resilience. So look into your own lives. You may not have it. You may not be in the Army and have compensated soldier fitness available. That's fine. You've got other things. You're not an 8th grader in Philadelphia. You don't have the Penn Resilience Program handy. But you can learn to leverage these other aspects of your life to optimize PERMA. Okay, next, please. So just before we get into our three stories, I'm going to tell you about a little bit of research I did. This has to do with these PERMA characteristics not only being important, they're also trainable. So here are, so I gave 1,200 new cadets before, right, they just arrived at West Point, before they've been socialized and become into the institution and begun their basic military training. I gave them a resilience skills assessment. And the 6 resilience skills I assessed when they arrived were positive outlook. Oh, you can see them there. Spirituality, active coping. This means is taking an active strategy versus a passive one in dealing with obstacles. Self-efficacy. That means your belief that your actions and abilities make a difference in the world. Meaning making, and very important at the end, acceptance and limitation of circumstances. And so, what I wanted to know, by the way, I also assessed grit and hardiness in them at the same time. And this comes at, so I'm still reading a few comments at the bottom about how can military training grow grit, and does it or does it not? I really wanted to see is if I reassessed all of these cadets after their basic military training, after their summer of training at West Point, and at that time it was still pretty rigorous, and had a pretty high attrition rate, 7 or 8%, which for West Point's pretty high. I actually predicted that grit would increase, because it should. I mean, it should be this grit building exercise. And I saw a comment below just now. It's not necessarily. You are correct, sir or ma'am. It is not necessarily. And so what we found is that grit did not change. It didn't go down, but it didn't go up. Nor did hardiness. It didn't go down or didn't go up. Now, that said, cadets are a fairly gritty and hardy group. I mean, they've worked awfully hard in high school to get accepted to a place as selective as West Point or the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy. So, in some ways, about the only way they could go was down. It's hard to get them much grittier. But what I found most interesting and most actually promising was each one of those 6 components of resilience skills, every single one of them not just went up, they went up significantly and substantially. So sometime between when they arrived at West Point and during basic training and then on into the first semester, those all went up, and they went up in big ways. So the implication may be that those of you who are military trainers out there, that maybe grit's not going up, and maybe it's unrealistic to hope to raise grit, which could be a personality trait and therefore somewhat more etched in stone. But I'm sure that what military training can do is help your recruits and trainees improve in these 6 areas. Maybe not each cadet or each trainee may not improve in all 6. But surely we can help help them develop positive outlook, spirituality, coping, and so forth in a better way. Okay, next. Okay, 3 stories. Next. So the first story I'm going to tell you is a guy that General Kaz and I had the rare opportunity to interview as we wrote our book. And his name is he's now Lieutenant Colonel retired, but at the time this all happened, he was Captain Barry Bridger, United States Air Force. So Barry Bridger was adopted son to a family in, let me get the town right, Baden Bladenboro, North Carolina. They adopted him in 1940. So he was just a toddler during World War II, and has vague memories when he was 4 and 5, uncles and parents and and aunts and everybody involved in the war effort, the World War II effort. And he had brothers who were older, who quite a bit older, who also became involved in later as pilots. And so from a very young age, he really wanted to become a pilot and to contribute to the country. He's a very patriotic kid. Growing up in rural North Carolina, I'm sure he had ample opportunity to have his values inculcated on a daily basis to him by his family and his friends in the social environment he was in. So anyway, he does what he wanted to do. He ends up doing well in high school. Yeah, he goes to college as an ROTC member, graduates, is commissioned into the Air Force, actually gets to be a fighter pilot. He becomes an F-4 pilot. And then, let me just read what happened to him so I don't miss anything here, and pardon for reading. But on January 23rd of 1967, he was on a mission over North Vietnam when his F-4 became disabled by enemy fire. He and his backseater had to eject, and he was taken prisoner by the North Vietnamese army. And then began 2,232 days of incarceration as a prisoner of war. Most of that time was at the Hanoi Hilton. When he was first taken prisoner, when I was in the Air Force, I had some of my senior officers, a few had been POWs. And typically what would happen, once you were initially taken prisoner, they'd take you to a sort of rural camp, but eventually they'd funnel you into the Hanoi Hilton. Well, I'm not going to read too much more from you about this, just to say that the conditions at the Hanoi Hilton were challenging, to say the least. They were not fed, they were tortured. Here's a quote that's probably worth reading to you. If you were captured by the North Vietnamese, you were placed into a concrete box. You had no idea what was about to happen. You were all alone with your thoughts and values. Eventually, you were taken to an interrogation and given two choices: cooperate fully with the North Vietnamese camp authority or go into the torture chamber. Well, Barry and most of the other POWs went to the torture chamber gladly. And the way Barry says it, he says here, I have another quote, I won't read it. He said, the more time that he was spent in the torture chamber, when he was one of his friends and fellow prisoners was not in there. So he felt like he was helping them. He's helping his fellow human, his fellow prisoner, by taking the heat. So 2,232 days go by, and tortured regularly, deprived of basic needs, and finally he's repatriated on the 4th of March, 1973. If you're old enough, you may remember seeing pictures of our POWs being repatriated, coming off of flights out of Vietnam and brought back to the U.S. I have just a couple more short quotes from him. He says, he talks about his experience, and he says his experiences, and I'm not going to say all of them here, summarize, here's his quote, that character and honorable service as a POW are the most important thing to him. Now I've come home with the satisfaction of knowing I served with honor. He had that sense. And then one last quote. For American Vietnam POWs, the depravity and evil of our existence ravaged our minds and bodies. But the values of a good heart, the strength of our spirit, was empowered by each selfless act to rally around those in greater need than ourselves. It was a point of honor, therefore, to remain in the torture chamber as long as possible, to deny its use to a fellow POW. I'll stop his story now, but when you think about, and go to the next slide, please. When you think about how you survive 2,232 days in captivity under those conditions, remember those 24 character strings we've been talking about? You probably had to use a lot of them. But the one common theme that comes out of Captain Bridger's experiences was that of courage. And it was physical courage, but it was also moral courage. Where did it come from? Well, we alluded to this earlier, his upbringing, from his military training, the teams he was on, from his fellow pilots, the members of his unit in combat. Strengths of the head, heart, gut, they all contributed, but really courage was his signature strength. So let's just go to the next slide. I'm gonna dig into courage just a little bit more and defining what it is, because sometimes we think we know what courage is and maybe we don't really. Most important point is that courage is moral as well as physical. And I would argue that in most cases, moral courage is more difficult than physical courage and less common. So it has factors that define it. So nobody forced Barry Bridger to become an Air Force officer. Nobody forced him to choose to fly F-4s. He could have flown C-130s or some other fixed wing asset that was flying at the time. But he chose that. He went willingly into combat. He knew the dangers going in, but he wanted to do it. And he wanted to do it because he wanted to serve his country and make the world better, make his country better. Which gets at the second defining characteristic of courage. It entails a noble or honorable goal, doing something bigger for yourself. Third, it involves significant personal risk. Clearly, in this case, you can see what that would be. Real courage is more than a one-time response to an isolated situation. Every time a fighter pilot in Vietnam strapped themselves into that cockpit and took off, they knew this could happen. And then true courage is selfless. So, when you think about courage, it's more than the firefighter running into a burning building to pull out a person. That's courageous, to be sure. But think of courage in a broader context. So think about however you may feel about this politically. You think about the courage for a professional athlete today to refuse to play the game because they want to stand up for a cause bigger than themselves of social justice. That's not physical courage, but it's a free choice. It's an honorable goal. There's personal risk. There are people who they might get traded or they'll have fans that turn on them. If they do it consistently, and I think they are, and it's certainly selfless, that example also provides, just as much as Barry Bridger, an example of courage. At the bottom, I just mentioned a Medal of Honor study. A friend of mine, colleague of mine at the University of Michigan, Nansuk Park, did a study of the narratives that accompanied Medal of Honor citations, about 200 of them, and did what's called a content analysis and looked at what character strengths popped out. Well, you will not be surprised to learn that the number one character strength was courage, okay? But by definition, you're not put up for the Medal of Honor unless you engage in a courageous act. So the second one was the most important one in most ways. And the unifying theme across all of these Medal of Honor recipients was humility. And so it's courage mated with humility that really differentiated in the sample of these Medal of Honor recipients, those who really stood above the rest and those who didn't. Okay, so that's courage. Next. Well, I don't know if building your gut strengths is the right way to label this. I think we all have them to one extent or another. So the first thing is to know yourself. I'll tell you a story about one of the bravest people I know. He's now an Army colonel, but I knew him when he was a captain. He came of age in the Army when the global war against terror took off in 2001. He served valiantly in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, and been awarded appropriate citations of valor. One of the strongest, bravest people I know. But he's afraid of the dark. He is absolutely afraid of the dark. We were in my office one day at West Point, and when he was teaching there, we had a power outage, and I thought he was kidding. He said, "Doc, give me some light. I gotta have some light." And so I turned on the lights. Thanks. So the point is that we're not all uniformly courageous about everything. Maybe it's a bit of a trivial example, but know yourself. You can actually, and think too about maybe how to develop this in your children as well and others. Look for chances to practice courage, to do something that's hard, that's outside yourself, to stand up to an outrage, to force yourself to stand up and be a voice. It doesn't have to be physical courage. look for and to be a role model for courageous behavior. But again, saying that moral courage, always keep that in mind as a major component of this. Embrace the suck, soldiers say. Embrace stressful conditions. Learn that you have the skills to overcome adversity. Develop that confidence and surround yourself with courageous people. In some ways, doesn't this come back again? I keep using this example of what military training should be like, you know. And if you learn in training to overcome stressful conditions and learn your limits, but also your capabilities, you have a good chance of enhancing those gut strengths. Okay, next. Okay, next slide. Okay, next one I won't spend quite as much time on. This is strengths of the heart. Strengths of the heart, you might recall, are like kindness and capacity to love and forgiveness and social intelligence. I'll tell you the story about a Greene County, Missouri deputy, Aaron Rodgers. Not Rogers, Roberts. Aaron Rodgers, a football player. Aaron Roberts. So this one's a little close to home to me. That was my sheriff's department. Now, what happened to Deputy Roberts happened long after I'd left, about 10 years back after I'd left the department. But he was dispatched on a routine call on a late one night on September 7th of 2018. It was raining, a lot of thunderstorms that night. And he's, you know, that county is several hundred square miles. We have about 300,000 population, but we only often have 5 or 6 cars out, you know, because people taking vacation days or illness or whatever it might be. We're run pretty thin a lot of the times. He answered the call by himself, went back on duty, was driving along, and he made a radio transmission. Headquarters, my car's being swept off a bridge, low water bridge. Officer needs help. That was the last radio transmission ever heard from him. So, you know, I kept calling his number 160. Are you there? 160, you're there. It's a radio number. It doesn't happen, right? It's no response. Well, in the morning, searchers found him behind the wheel of his patrol car, several hundred meters downstream from the location of the bridge, and he unfortunately drowned while on duty. Just couldn't get out of the car because of the force of the water. So here's where the strengths of the heart come in. So if you are the sheriff, or if you're the squad leader, the squad lieutenant, the shift lieutenant for this sheriff's office, you know, this is devastating to a small department. You know, it's devastating to a big department to lose somebody. Small department like that, you know everybody and you know them well. This guy's really well liked. He knew his family, knew his wife. And so you'll see in military situations, in law enforcement and firefighting and other first responders, that when something like this happens, we rally short term. We come to the funeral. You'll see that, you know, every cop car from 3 states around shows up, and they really honor them. And you can almost take that for granted. That's going to happen. And it's a big help to the family. You know, it's really comforting. It's an expression of love and respect. But what the Greene County Sheriff, Jim Arnott, did, it was a little bit different, was that after the dust settled, after Aaron had been buried and had his services, he got a group of the senior deputies, from his squad to come over, and they offered to help clean up Kim, his widow's house, and kind of just get the house in order. They noticed the garage was really in kind of unkempt shape. And they said, could we clean up your garage? And they're doing all this great labor, and Sheriff Arnott looks over, and he sees this, let me get the year right, a 1995 Mitsubishi Eclipse, kind of beat up and sitting up on blocks. And he said to the wife, Kim, said, what's the deal with this car? And she said, well, the story goes, I won't read you all the details of it, but that was the car that Aaron was driving the day they met. She'd never met him before. And she goes on to say that, I love that car so much. She said, when he asked me out, all I really wanted was a ride in that car. That was what it was all about. But dang it, fooled around, we got married, you know? So it was this great love story. There that car was, as meaningful it was to her sitting up on blocks. So Sheriff Arnott says, well, do you mind if we fix it up for you? And, you know, she agrees. Well, 7 months go by. And during that time frame, let's read a little bit. Arnott, this is again the sheriff, asked her if he could rebuild the car and restore it with the help of other deputies and members of the local community. It wasn't just deputies. On March 19th, 2019, so this is a little less than a year after the incident, Sheriff Arnott presented the restored car, totally restored to Kim. It cost over $7,000, but more importantly, hundreds of hours of labor to restore, but the car was now in mint condition. So you can imagine what Kim said. Here's a quote from Kim. Said, "There's so many hands in this car, it just blows my mind. My mind can't even wrap around how many people helped out on this." And so what we're illustrating here is strengths of the heart, strengths of love, the love for a comrade, and how important that is in getting over the adversity and shock at the loss of someone who operates sort of at the tip of the spear. So that's just one example. I think probably if you look at your own lives, you can see, plenty of examples of the same. And I see a comment about Julie about the community response. It's important to point out it wasn't just the sheriff's department. A lot of people came in and helped. A lot of people did. And that just meant a lot to Kim. Okay, next. So employing strengths of the heart to deal with the tragedy, we've already talked about this. So capacity to love, gratitude, kindness, you can see all of that in there. Next. So how do you build strengths of the heart? There's no easy answer, You've seen your hierarchy of 24 strengths. You can kind of see where they fall in your own case, where they fall in that hierarchy. But there are several different strengths of the heart, and there's some that you're better at, and some you're probably not as great at. A psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers talked about how you develop strengths of the heart really in children, and he has this concept called unconditional positive regard, which could equate with love. So when you're raising children, he found that children who grew up to be well-rounded, mature, emotionally sound children and later adults were raised by parents who made it clear that they loved them for who they were, and as opposed to imposing what he called conditions of worth upon the children. So imposing conditions of worth on children, he considered a bad thing. So here's an example would be parents who would withhold love and attention to their children unless they made an A on their report card. If they made a B+, they might be cold towards them. And you do that once or twice, it's probably not that big a deal, but if that is your standard pattern for raising children, that impacts the children's, internalization of these strengths of the heart. Well, you can apply that to leadership as well. So if you're a leader and you only respond to your workers when they excel, and that you only like them and to pay attention to them if they produce it on a given day, and at other times you kind of discount their validity as a member of your team, that can be toxic. Now that's not to say that you don't encourage everybody to improve and point out mistakes to people, and you certainly do what you must to help children get better at their schoolwork or other tasks, and the same way with people you work with or work for you. But the concept of unconditional positive regard means that you value them as a human being, even if they do wrong. If they do wrong enough, you have to deal with it, but that doesn't change your value to them in your eyes. Their value to you, excuse me, in your eyes. So that's an important piece to think about. We looked at specific things in the last couple of weeks, the gratitude letter, where you find someone who's done something really important for you that helped you, but you never told them, and you write a letter of gratitude and explain all that to them. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I've got one I put in the book, a cadet that I helped who, I didn't realize it helped him that much, but he'd run into some really significant trouble at West Point. Everyone else had given up on him, but I always saw good in him and potential. And when he graduated a year late, I came to work one day, a couple of days before graduating, he slipped a handwritten letter under my door, which is a gratitude letter. I'd like it better if he'd had the courage to come and just read it to me, but then we probably all would have cried and it would have been embarrassing. But it was very meaningful. It helped him more than it helped me. Self-reflect on your strengths of the heart, but look, engage in other reflection. don't think just about yourself. Think about ways you can help others and your feelings towards them, the way to be better with other people. In the Jewish religion, there's this concept called tikkun olam. You can Google that. It's a little more complex than I'm saying here, but part of the good life is to go out and do good deeds. Well, you learn that in scouting, do a good deed every day. It's not a unique concept. The wisdom of the ages, be it religion or things like scouting, and talks consistently about the importance of doing well for others, using your strengths of the heart and thereby growing them. There's actually research which shows that kindness may be genetically programmed into our DNA. But that's a sort of a scientific, nerdy thing. I just wanted to throw it out there so you might find it interesting. And then finally, this whole concept of band of brothers and band of sisters, band of brothers and sisters, being part of something greater than yourself is a great way to nurture and strengthen your strengths of the heart. Okay, next, one last story. And this would have to do with strengths of the, well, almost next. Oh, this guy you're seeing the picture of, that's a psychologist by the name of Chris Peterson, who's now deceased, unfortunately. Chris is one of the great originators of positive psychology, and his most famous quote, and he's told me this many times, is illustrated on the left: other people matter. If you have one thing to live, one principle to live by, always remember that other people matter. We all get tied up on our own worlds and our own lives sometimes. Other people matter. If we all ascribe to that belief and practiced it, a lot of our problems in the world would dissipate. Chris also says, and I'll just read it because it's impactful to me, if positive psychology teaches us anything, is that all of us are a mixture of strengths and weaknesses. No one has it all, and no one lacks it all. That's consistent with the theme of the last 3 weeks. Find out what your strengths are, leverage them, don't get too freaked out about your weaknesses. We got plenty of strengths. We all have the strengths we need to overcome the adversities and traumas and challenges of life. Okay, next, one last story. So this is, now you look carefully, if you got good visual acuity, you'll see that's Brigadier General Dave Hodney, but when he did this, he was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Hodney. I've had the pleasure of meeting him fairly recently. He was over at West Point. We had a nice chat. So in 2010, he was a battalion commander working for then Major General Bob Caslen. And they were working an area of operations up north of Baghdad in northern Iraq. It was pretty violent and unstable time. There were the Sunnis were at war with themselves. Excuse me, I'll get a drink. Basically, a civil war going on, mixed in with Shiite violence, and then the various sorts of military aggressions against our forces and the other forces on the ground on our side. And so it's a pretty dangerous place. And so when Dave Hodney took over this battalion, he was given the order, like, you need to kind of straighten this area out. It's really been bad. We've had a lot of KIAs. There's a lot of chaos going on. And all the, but that's 2010, so we've been there quite a while. And all the previous battalion commanders in that area, they just used brute military force. It was more guns, bombs, and whatnot. And that works for a little while. And in some cases it's effective. But over the period of time, nothing really changed. It was still this really dangerous place. And so Dave Hodney got to thinking about it, and he said, we've got to be soldiers, we've got to do military operations, and if we're engaged in a fight, we'll execute that fight as violently as best as we can. But let's do some other things too. So he got to looking around, and he saw that, like, the infrastructure in that part of Iraq was just literally shot and abandoned and no good. And there's this dilapidated, means run down tomato factory. The farmers there grew a lot of tomatoes, but they weren't able to do anything with them because the factory was broken. So to fix that, he encouraged farmers to start growing tomatoes and get somebody to fix the factory, but they couldn't fix the factory because they didn't have any money that they could invest. Well, they didn't have any money because there were no banks. They had some money, but they couldn't put them in banks, and then therefore they couldn't get loans. So he just worked his tail off, he and his staff, and they were able to convince the local Iraqi authorities to stand up a couple of banks. He was able then to get loans to farmers to start growing their crops. Well, once he started growing crops, they had to fix the tomato factory. When they fixed the tomato factory, that increased a lot of traffic because the farmers were now driving in along the route to the tomato factory. In fact, there's so many farmers and trucks coming that way to and from the tomato, it's actually tomato paste factory, it's not tomato paste factory. There's so many that became like traffic jams. And so some enterprising Iraqi built a parking lot and charged the others a little bit of money, to park there. And another enterprising Iraqi built like a snack stand. And another one said, oh, the cans and the paste company, they need labels. So he built a label factory, production outfit. There's all this cascading series of events occurred because Dave Hodney had the strengths of the head to see that if he could energize just even one small part of that economy, all these second, third, and fourth order effects, which would make things better for the local Iraqis who were really trying to help, truly win hearts and minds. And it was really a very positive and long-lasting effect, more effective in the long run than merely relying upon brute military power. Next, please. So these were the Scarecrow. And Scarecrow coveted what now General Hodney has. This is creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, love of learning, perspective, to name a few. And you maybe have your scores in those from taking the VIA earlier. Can next, please. What can you do to cultivate or nurture these? Here's some ideas. It's not an end all, but I think a lot of times our own natural innate curiosity and creativity is kind of drummed out of us through the sort of harsh realities of life. Like most children are really curious about stuff. And so why are we not curious? It's because we don't have any time in the day to be curious, right? You're working all day, you've got children to take care of, perhaps, you got your things you do. But if you set aside time to read it, and looking at the third bullet, to rediscover your innate curiosity, it's there. You just have to uncover it. Maybe you're not a museum guy or gal, but go anyway. Actively explore new ideas. Some point, if you have time, join a book club. Well, my wife's in a book club, and it's, I don't want to join their book club, but I wouldn't mind joining the dean of faculty at West Point's book club, and study books about war and conflict and leadership. That would be interest me a lot. And kind of look at these things. You can practice creativity, learn to brainstorm, read biographies of creative people. The most important thing, give yourself time for reflection. There, I see the comment, running around and checking with my head cut off. Yes, we all do that. That's why you need time for reflection. And also, know your best talents. My theme, right? Know your strengths and use them. Learn your strengths and use them. Over and over, say that. Okay, next, please. All right, getting close here to discussion time. Another thought here, you have all these strengths that you can use. You have strengths of the heart and the head and the guts. Some of them help you do better at your job, like grit, or maybe persistence or self-regulation, all make you kind of do better things you have to perform at. Other constellations of strengths make you a better leader. Others make you more resilient to the face of harsh adversity. Other strengths combine to help you in social settings. So it's not like grit is the only answer. Okay? So if you could just have one strength and it was grit, that would help you a lot on the top one. It would help you less in the other three. My message to you is that learning to be self-aware of your whole hierarchy of character strengths, all 24 of them, allow you to bring strength to task, match strength to task or tool to task for these various aspects of our lives. Okay, next. You've seen this before. In the center, a life of pleasure, engagement, and meaning. This is getting at what the previous slide got at. Well, whether you're, if you're trying to do well at your job, maybe that's one group of those strengths, one subset of those strengths. If you're trying to do well with your family, maybe that's a different subset. If you're trying to do well leading a group, that's yet another. Self-awareness, reflection, and learning to intentionally use these strengths has been scientifically validated to make you do better at these things. Next. So here we are. We don't want to just survive, we want to thrive. Okay. Stress mitigation starts with the performance triad. Eat well, sleep well, get your exercise. Does good things for your brain as well as your biceps. You know, a reasonably rested, well-nourished brain that's supported by aerobic and strength training is a more effective brain. It will, and if your brain's effective, you'll make better decisions. You make better decisions, a lot of good things come into place. Before the bang, we are all most of you are in occupations that are challenging. As you train up, as you're a new soldier or you're a new SART, you train up, you know, take advantage of things like, just put CSF, Company Soldier Fitness Area, as an example. But become self-aware, I've been saying, about your strengths and your capabilities. Learn who you are and what you have to offer to overcome adversity. So it's a learning. Before the bang is learning and building. It's learning and building. Learning about yourself and building your strengths. During the siege, during the fight, now you've got the personal body armor. Now you've got hardiness. You've got grit. You've got social intelligence. To the skills necessary, the self-regulation, to grit your teeth and get through the fight. And then after the battle, other skills come into play during reintegration. Now, when I say battle, I mean that in an allegorical way. I don't mean that after the battle for a police officer is one thing, for a SARC is another thing, but we all have battles, literal or figuratively speaking. But after it's over, sense-making and coming to terms and focusing on the positive become important. And those involve different sorts of strengths. So my friends, I think that's it. Let's go to the next slide. I believe this is it. Kind of abrupt end. Mission complete. I went into Google Images and put in mission complete, and all these same thing come up. I'm not sure where it came from, but mission is complete. So with that, let me pause. And I've finished my formal comments. We have more time than we've had in the past for general discussion. Let's open to that. So I'm yours. Have at it.
Thanks so much, Mike. It looks like the first question was from earlier in the presentation when you were talking about positive thoughts. And so someone asked, is there any truth to positive thoughts producing positive results? So for example, when we continuously focus on the negative, it will eventually impact the positive in our lives and start us into that downward spiral. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, positive thoughts are important, and not just because they make you feel better, but because if you think positive, that means you have confidence in a sense of self-efficacy and self-control. That's if when you do reach that inevitable challenge or obstacle, if you're positive, you're more likely to go over, around, or under that obstacle rather than throw your hands up and quit. Okay, so a positive attitude is critical in that sense.
Thanks so much, Mike. Sorry about that. I was on mute. The one of the questions I had is around locus of control. And so you talked about how our perceived control impacts our stress and how we respond to things. Is there any ways that you know of, or are there any ways to increase your sense of control in certain situations, recognizing that some situations are truly out of our control, but in some cases, and thinking about POWs, some of their control, the little control they had was sometimes how they responded to those situations. So is there anything we can do from a practical perspective to really shift our sense of control?
I think when you're in a tough situation, challenging situation, whether it's something as intense as a POW situation or just a problem you're having at work on a given day, the importance is you sort of have to sort of do a mental triage of what you control and what you can't, right? Or something you may have some influence and how much influence, and start pecking away at that for which you do have control. Because success begets success, and And as you build momentum, so that's part of the logic of military training. You begin with things that trainees can do, and then are challenging them even more and more and more. And eventually they're doing amazing things and building confidence in the process of doing that. I'd also just editorially say, Jess, that we always say perceive control, right? Perceived locus of control. It's psychologically healthy to believe that your actions are going to help, when in reality maybe sometimes they don't. Because you're quite right. All the wishing is in the world would not keep that Hurricane Laura from hitting the coast. Okay, but what could they do? So if I were in Lake Charles, Louisiana, I would say, well, I have no control over where this hurricane's going to hit. But what can I do? Well, I can board up my windows. I can secure things. I can get my pets. I can get myself in a car or a bus and get the heck out of Dodge. And so you're right. Life is always sort of this balance between what you can, what you can't control, but you have to focus on that which you can.
Another question we have here, Mike, is about any recommendations you have for exercises or strategies on building resilience and cohesion when you have members of the unit that don't seem to be invested in the group success. So are there things, despite, there's always a couple naysayers in any group you're in, and are there things you can do to overcome some of that?
Yes. Some leaders are just intuitively better at that than others. And to me, that's not a satisfactory condition. I think if some people are intuitively good at this, maybe they have some things we could learn ourselves as leaders to do. Let me give you an example. So, I mentioned some of my work with professional basketball, and I was meeting with the general manager of the Spurs, and he'd be happy to tell you the story if he were here. I'm not giving any secrets away. One of the things that makes Greg Popovich such a great future Hall of Fame NBA coach is that he gets the team he gets, right? So they draft players. They don't always know that much about them. They may trade for them. So he got this team of 15 players. But he's really good at assessing those who kind of have internalized the program and those who haven't. But more importantly, he's good at understanding what it is about those who haven't, why they haven't. So the story I have is that, and I won't name the names of the player, but he had a player that they drafted, and he just wasn't fitting in socially. And when you don't fit in socially in something that intense, it hurts you on the court. And he wasn't a big problem. He just wasn't, as the person says, he wasn't getting with the program. So what Pop did is he called 2 or 3 of his senior players together, and he said, well, you know their roster, so I won't say names, but he said, guys, here's what's going on with Smith. That's not the name, just making up a name. What can we do? And so they came up with this game plan of who was going to go to dinner with that kid every night and how they would progressively bring him along. And over a relatively short period of time, through intentional effort to shape the behavior they wanted, they were able to bring this kid like so far out of his his funk that it was just a transformational difference, and he then became part of the team in a very complete sense. So that's a great example, I think, because a head basketball coach is kind of like a squad leader. I think Army squad's 9, is Marine squad maybe 12. So you're talking roughly, it's just a small team. At that level, the leader must know the personalities and strengths and weaknesses of each of the players, in the team, and coming up with creative ways. There may not be a menu, no book you just open up and say, if X happens, here's the 3 things you should do to fix it. But to actively, concoct or develop strategies to change the behavior in the direction you want it to go. So I'd say don't give up on it and have a plan. And I think a plan would depend a lot on who the individual is. I give lots of examples from the Spurs, but In fact, I'd say Pops probably spends as much time thinking about ways to promote cohesion and a sense of teammateship as he does the X's and O's of basketball.
That makes all the sense, Mike, and especially because so many of these things are interrelated. One of the other questions we have is around procrastination, and this one certainly resonates with me. So I think about, so often we know what we have to do to increase our resilience or to be healthier, yet, many times we wait to the last minute and, you say, hey, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do this again. But then you find yourself doing the same thing over and over. Are there some practical tips you could give us for shifting our habits in this area?
Well, one reaction is, congratulations, you're a human being. It's like, that's there's a little bit or maybe a lot of me in that comment. And but if you think that's kind of a problem, you might ask yourself, literally go back to your scores on the Values in Action survey and say, are there any strengths that I could use to bring to focus on this particular issue? And another way, this is more just getting around to the details, I find that if you measure stuff and track it and write it down, it's harder to procrastinate. So when I'm in writing mode, if I'm acting like this last book I wrote, I told myself I was going to write 1,000 words a day. And I said, oh my God, 1,000 words a day. Well, it's a little bit of effort, but it's not crazy. It's not a crazy number. And when I got to my 1,000 words, sometimes it'd be 1,200 or even 1,500. Maybe it's 999. I could find an extra word to insert, make my 1,000. You feel good. You know you've done it. Reflect back on it. Reward yourself. And the next day, you open up the computer. You got to do another 1,000 words. It becomes less and less foreign territory to you. You condition yourself to sort of make a habit of those things that you don't. Nobody likes to write, so I like that example. I think, and it's hard work, not in the physical sense, but in the mental sense. And if we can sort of track and quantify those things and make them a daily priority, and heck, even reward yourself when you've done it, 2 or 3 days in a row, it comes back to behavior. What can you do to change your behavior? So I think you can do that if you're systematic about it.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. A few others I see we've got here. How do you talk to leaders about the anxiety and stress that employees are feeling during the pandemic? So we're recognizing that people are trying to juggle jobs, kids, school, family, and oftentimes leaders are so mission focused to the exclusion of these other areas. Is there a way to address that with leaders in a way that's more effective?
I can imagine. I've worked for some leaders, quote unquote leaders, managers, that would be a big challenge. You could feel intimidated about that if they're so strictly mission focused that they don't seem to care about the employee. If you've got somebody you're working for that's like that, maybe it's because you don't trust them. You don't go to them because you don't trust them. And remember what trust was? It was competence, character, and caring. So oftentimes a leader who is totally mission focused may be hyper competent, and they may be a fairly high character, but you perceive at least that they don't really care about you or your family and so forth. And that's hard. I mean, that really is a hard situation to find yourself in. I guess 2 things I would say is look again to your strengths, your social intelligence, your other strengths, and see if you could come up with an actual plan to how you would go about addressing this, but just do it. The worst thing that's going to happen to is you're going to stare a hole in you or something. But more often than not, that leader is probably dealing with the same exact things. And maybe they're not approachable because they don't feel that they have just don't feel comfortable. Like sometimes I don't always feel comfortable telling people about my problems. Maybe opening up to them in a safe way, in a way that you feel safe would be helpful, and see how they react. And I think you might be surprised because your leader also has all the same concerns you do. They're probably putting the game face on when they're at work.
Yeah, it's a great It's a great point. Some of the other questions we have are around reflection. And when we're moving so fast, it's tough to really sit back and do an assessment of how we're doing, how others around us are doing. Are there any practical suggestions you have for building in more reflection time, or taking the time when you're stressed to think about, okay, what else am I not considering here? How do I think about recovery, for example, versus just go, go, go?
Well, again, people who are listening to this webinar are professional, hardworking people with busy lives, and we all, struggle, I think, to find time to do those things. I think here it's important to, in your daily to-do list, besides the taskers, the actual work things you've got to do, to elevate in importance some time for reflection and even just kind of getting away from it. And you don't have to get away from things for a long time. If you can if you're an exerciser, always found that running and walking and biking and even going to the gym and doing a few weights and stuff, often I'm problem solving stuff, from the job, so to speak, while I'm doing that. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone, but the best solutions I come up with to problems tend to be when I'm engaged in those sorts of behaviors. It's hard for me to come up to a solution to a hard problem when I'm sitting at my computer. And so if you really want to be as productive and insightful and creative as you can be and need to be at your job, I think prioritizing, I wouldn't even call it me time, but some time during the day, even if it's just 15 minutes or 20 minutes, where you're not around your cell phone, or you just turn it off, get away from the office, walk out your office for 10 minutes and walk 10 minutes back if you can squeeze that in. Reflection time is so vital, it needs to be raised in priority. So I'll tell a story about myself, and it's not a very nice story in some ways. I had a sergeant major who lives nearby. We were sitting in our backyard the other day, and you guys know I'm a professor, right? Professors don't have a real job. I'm not getting shot at or lifting heavy weights every day and all that stuff. And compared to like my dad, who had a high school education and just work his knuckles to the bone every day, I've got it made. I'm the first to admit it. But the things I do, so the things I have to do in my job, they're all strengths of the head. It doesn't matter if I lift 100 pounds or 300 pounds. It doesn't matter. What matters is my ability to put thoughts together and develop a lecture or discussion for cadets, or to write an article or a blog, or maybe do a webinar that makes sense to people. And the thing about that is I don't have to be sitting here in front of my keyboard to do that. And so I've developed the habit of, because I like to walk partly. So I parked my car at West Point, literally 1.5 miles from my office. And so every morning I have 1.5 miles walk in, guess what? 1.5 miles walk back. And people drive by and think, well, there's old Matthews. He's just out, walking, having a good time, smelling the flowers and, whatever you do when you're walking. But if they actually knew, I'm actually composing sentences or paragraphs or thinking about points I want to put into a lecture, that when I do sit down for my computer, I can just do it, So anyway, Sergeant Major said he was taking the base taxi not too long ago, and the taxi driver's a retired guy, not sure what from. And he sees me walking along and he says, pardon my French here, listeners, but he says, look at that son of a bitch. All he's got to do is walk around all day. Well, Sergeant Major knows me and he knows what I was doing. But don't be embarrassed to take a little time and be, think that people are going to think worse of you for taking a little time to be reflective. So it'll make you a better, more productive worker, a happier person as a result. Is that enough? Does that help, Jess?
No, that does help. I love that. I actually feel like now I've got no legitimate excuses for not doing the same. So we've got a few more, Mike. One of them is around what you can do to stop downplaying yourself during self-assessments. And so I think this comes to some of the confidence piece, maybe the control piece.
Well, go back to the PERMA model. Don't literally go back to the slide, but think about positive, what can you do to build positive emotion? And so positive emotion can be a number of things. So some of it comes from just doing something that feels good, like a good meal or, working out or something of that nature. Positive emotion can come from being engaged in something larger than yourself, and so on. And so to keep from getting down on yourself, chart your successes and stop. We're really good at worrying and having anxiety when we fail, right? Like I had a little failure yesterday on something and I felt pretty bad about it. But I'm not sitting here thinking about today because I've learned not to. But what we're not good at is when something good happens, we're not good at savoring it. Like how many times have you been recognized at work for achievement, or maybe finished a degree or something good in your life, and you kind of shrug it off and just go on with your normal activities? It's really, to keep yourself positive, it's really important to stop and savor the good things of life, to hunt the good stuff, to look for the 3 blessings of each day we talked about before. I think if you do that sort of systematically and remind yourself that you have competencies. Remember Chris Peterson's quote from that little box a few slides ago? One thing positive psychology has taught us: none of us are perfect in all respects, but none of us fail in all respects. We all have skills and competencies and character that are good. Learn what those are, track them, learn to employ them. And I think self-esteem and self-competency will follow.
Great. Another one, Mike, and sorry, I know we're doing a little bit of rapid fire here. What are some of the exercises that folks could do with their teams during a team meeting or virtually to promote resilience in everything we've discussed? Any examples that you could share from other leaders in terms of what they're doing with their virtual teams, especially given the difficulties and, sometimes it's easy to do exercises when you're all there together, but any ideas that you've heard about that you think are really promising that the group might want to consider?
Yeah, I think part of it is doing some things that are not overtly task oriented towards the task of the day. So it'll tell you another Coach Popovich story. So unfortunately, I'd have to actually look at my book to get all these names exactly right. I probably shouldn't give you names anyway, but they were having practice right before a playoff game, first playoff of the season. This particular has been 3 or 4 years ago. And they got a player on the team who is from Australia. And if you're a real sports fan, you'll know who I'm talking about. And not only is he from Australia, he was an Aboriginal Australian. And so he was a person of color, growing up in a society which can be just as vicious as our society, as our nation, in terms of how people of color are treated. And anyway, this player takes a lot of pride in, being one of the few, maybe the only Aboriginal Australian who's a member of the NBA. And it's hard. I mean, it's there's enough stress in the NBA in a regular season, let alone going into the playoffs. You're going to be on national TV and you want to do well, and you want to excel, and you want to keep up the Spurs tradition, all that stuff. You don't want to fail. So you'd think Coach Popovich would be saying, okay, Jones, be sure and play defense against this guy in a certain way, and let's go to use a zone defense in these situations, go man to man this way. Notice all the X's and O's. But what he did instead, this is what I mean, getting off task as you begin a work meeting. He says, hey, to the player, he says, tell me, like who the Martin Luther King was for the Aborigines, and there's a name, you can look it up. And this turned out the coach knew this was this guy's birthday. So it's like it's a really big day in Australia, but nobody in America knows it. He said, and so he got the players all are gathered at center court, and he got this player to tell this guy's story, and why it's so important to them. And at the end, they were all hugging each other, and because the players could relate to what this player had gone through as an Aboriginal player, and in the same way Americans who suffer social injustice do. And so what they did, I think what that did was it put all the players into a common frame of mind around something bigger than that game that night. And I think, let's be honest, I mean, you know, most of us are in jobs where there's a lot more important things in the world than our little job. And if you're a leader, if from time to time you can think of an exercise, you know, a discussion exercise, maybe you don't even have to lead it, but where you can get your teammates thinking about something bigger than themselves, I think that's one good example of how to enhance team cohesion.
Such a great point, Mike, and I really appreciate that. I know a lot of the folks I've talked with who have been in combat have talked about how shared challenges often build cohesion. And I recognize not many of us are in combat situations or have had that experience, but just thinking about the bigger purpose and meaning and how that can really change your perspective.
Yeah, if you don't derive meaning from adversity, it can lead to bad consequences. There's a psychiatrist named Larry Dewey who did a lot of research and study. He's my age, been MD psychiatrist for all these years, working mostly with almost entirely with veterans, mostly Vietnam veterans, and many of whom are depressed and have PTSD. They're bad enough they're hospitalized in VA hospitals. And he said that it seemed worse for Vietnam veterans, he thought. But this is what I'm about to say is probably could be true of any veteran. You know, the experiences they had in combat, to include taking the lives of enemy soldiers, which violates every principle we're raised with. We believe in the sanctity of life. You don't take a life. And even if you kill an enemy soldier, even though it's sanctioned and it's the right thing to do in some respects, many of these soldiers end up having problems, ex-soldiers, because they felt like, he put it, they sort of lost their religion. They lost their moral compass. And they lost it because they didn't have a leadership or a team cohesion in place that could help them build a larger meaning of their actions in combat. And so, you know, I suspect the World War II veterans, I mean, many of them suffered in a lot of ways, right? But, you know, you saved the world. You saved the world in World War II. And yeah, you know, my dad's he didn't win the Medal of Honor or anything, but, you know, 14 months of combat as a combat medic in the Pacific Theater was not easy. And I know that as life went on that he could say, but, you know, but we actually preserve freedom and democracy. And so, but at smaller levels, leaders have a great power in whether you're a soldier or a police officer or a firefighter or a SARC, you know, helping manage these expectations and this sense of meaning and purpose in your work. I think it should be, in many ways, job number one if you're a leader in those tough situations.
Thanks so much, Mike. Great insights. And I know we're coming to a close here. I just wanted to thank Naval X for helping us put this on, Commander Floyd especially for all her hard work, Julie Patrick and Navia Summers for doing so much of the planning and graphics on all these events. And you, Mike, you know, for those of you who don't know, Mike is a true leader of character, having worked with him in a few different contexts and just some personal experiences where he's really helped me out. And I know he does the same for so many cadets, but it's just really been an honor having you on. And I wanted to thank everyone too for joining in. It's been an awesome discussion. And over to you, Mike, for any final comments.
Well, you know, there's no one single game plan that's going to just magically change our lives. It's hard work to change your life, you know, to maintain that positivity. I'll just go back to the idea of making yourself and your strengths and your character a priority. So if you imagine character to be like we call this book The Character Edge, because imagine character is like a knife, you know, or an edged tool. And suppose you use that tool to chop down weeds or to, you know, remove rocks from your garden, or in these variety of ways you can use it. Well, what happens to that tool? That edge gets dull, does it not? And just as we use character to get through life's hard parts, if we don't rejuvenate that character, our character edge gets dull as well. So taking time to emphasize your own and nurture your own character and well-being before the bang is of the utmost importance on being able to successfully deal with the adversities, the traumas, and the challenges that the pandemics, et cetera, that life inevitably gives us. So make it a priority, keep at it. And in closing, I'll say, this is the highlight of my summer, guys. I really enjoyed spending time with you. Maybe you think, well, it wasn't much of a summer for me, but I think it was. I think it was a great summer, and thanks for sharing these 4 days with me, the last 4 Fridays.
Thanks so much, Mike. We really appreciate it. And to everybody on the line who joined us, thank you. We will be sending out the links for the website and information if you don't have it already. It's up on the screen in terms of getting in touch with Julie Patrick for your certificates. And we will also be in touch for our next session. So we hope that you'll join us again. Thanks so much. Over.
Bye, all.
Bye.